All right, materials processing class, Mr. Voigt here. Our safety video on the router, the handheld router. So the routers we have are a little bit different than some of them. We have these D handle, these are called D handles. Some routers don't have those. So we end up having two on and off switches. There's one here and then one here. With a lot of routers, you just have the one switch up top. So these are easy. If I plug this in, it's not going to go on until I pull my trigger switch here. But on some routers, if that is on and you plug it in, it goes on. So one thing you always need to check with the router is that it's not on before you plug it in. That will be on the test as a safety measure. Obviously, this D handle also helps us control the router a little bit. Lots of routers just have two handles. Another really big safety thing will be always hold on with two hands to your router. So that will be one of those answers on the test. Some other parts of the router. Obviously, the bit is underneath. This is called our base, the flat part on the bottom. And the bit gets held in place. There's two nuts under here, kind of like the chuck on a drill, but it's actually called a collet on a router. So C-O-L-L-E-T. And the bit needs to go into that collet at least 3/4 of an inch. I mean, you don't want it just into the collet 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch. Just like a drill bit needs to go into the chuck a certain distance to be safe. Again, this is all about being safe. On the end of this particular bit, I don't know if you can see it, but there's a little wheel. It's called a pilot wheel. And that's there so that I can roll that down the side of a piece and I won't dig in. But you don't have to have these on there. Often, depending on what kind of cut you're trying to make, you want one on there. But it is not a safety measure. It's there to help you make your cut better. There's many bits that don't use pilot wheels, so it's not a safety measure. It's just there to help you do certain things. When you're using a router, so this is a good example here. When you do, like if I'm going to router this outside edge, I'm going to go counterclockwise, okay, around that edge. It cuts more efficient. It'll cut both directions, but it'll cut more efficiently going counterclockwise. All right, anytime I'm on an outer edge. If I'm going to do an inside edge like this, see how that's inside, then I'm going to go clockwise. It has to do with how that bit is impacting the wood. It cuts much more efficiently if you go the right direction. And you need to go fast enough that you don't burn the wood. If you sit in one spot, it'll just sit there and it'll burn little spots in your wood or burn the whole edge, really, if you go too slow. So you don't want to burn it. So you got to go fast enough you don't burn it, but you don't want to go so fast that you're just zipping through it. It's really hard on the machine and your blade, and it's not as safe to go that fast. So one other thing you want to do when you're routering is when I start, so if I'm going to go down this edge, I want to go counterclockwise, just like I'm doing here. But I want to make sure that when I start, I don't start out here and impact my edge first. I want to start, it says on the test, in the middle somewhere. Well, I do it in off the edge, and then I go, and then I can come back and go right off the edge. I go backwards for just about an inch. And the reason for that is, if I impact this edge, it has a tendency to peel this edge off and splinter it out, and it doesn't make a very nice cut. So again, start in the middle. Then you can turn the corner with that pilot edge. You just got to be careful. It has a tendency to want to pull you around the edge, that bit will. But anyway, you can also just go off the edge, start here, go that way, and come back and do your corner each time if you want, going backwards. So again, start in the middle. You want to make sure that your cord is never in the way of where you're cutting, like with any piece of equipment. Always keep the cord, and I think the way they phrase it on the test is out of your line of work. Okay, so keep that out of your way. You also, anytime you're doing anything with this, like with any piece of equipment, make sure it gets unplugged when you're trying to change a bit or make an adjustment where you need to get near that. The other thing you need to know, you adjust your height by twisting this little T bolt here or nut, and they just twist and your bit goes in and out. Watch. Okay, there's threads in there, and then there's little posts on my base, and they just twist together and they twist apart. This is called, and this will be on the test, the micrometer adjustment. So That's how you adjust your height with your micrometer adjustment. Okay? Again, hold it with both hands. The last thing, when I'm starting to cut, I don't want my bit, like with all pieces of machinery, I want all my bits or blades to get up to speed before I touch whatever it is that I'm going to be cutting or milling. The reason for that is you want it to cut. If I start it slow and I go real fast, it grabs or rips things apart. And not only will it ruin my cut a lot of times, it will take things out of your hand if they're small enough or not clamped down well. It just is not a good idea to start with something touching the wood. It just doesn't work out. So you got to make sure that you're out away from it. The other thing I always do, you got to be wearing eye protection like always. But I like to people want to stand up here where they can't see anything. Get your feet back and your rear end back. And get down here where you can see what's going on. Okay? We should clamp these things to the table anytime we get a chance. Now, obviously, the bigger piece that you're routering, often, the less clamping it takes. The ones we did for our widget boards were really little, so they required a lot of clamping. If I have a big piece of plywood here, a 4x8 piece of plywood, and I'm going around the edge, it's going to stay in place a lot better than a little tiny piece. So you just have to gauge how much you have to clamp something down. A board this size, I would probably put a clamp on it, just because as I'm moving it, I don't want that to be moving around as I router. That's not real safe. And one last thing I want to point out, if I'm routering on a table, I have to make sure that my router bit doesn't stick down far enough where I'm going to hit the table with my bit. If that's the case, then I have to make sure that I hang things off the edge of the table in order to do the routering so that my bit doesn't dig into the table. Okay, so, and by the way, just like with every other piece of equipment, when I'm stopped with this, so I have it on, when I let the trigger go, it'll continue to move for a little while, just like it does on all this equipment. And like the rules on all the other equipment, I am not supposed to leave until it stops rotating. Okay, let it wind all the way down. And on this one, what I've done in this class is, this I've been using as an example of how to cut around it. Well, that's our block. We're going to take it, and we're going to, when you're done, even if that's still moving, you can put it right in there. That way that bit is surrounded and nobody can touch it, and let it stop running before you go on and do other things. All right, that should be all you need for the router test. This is your last test, so get these things done, please. All right.